Welcome back to Sustainably Speaking. Today, I'm diving deep into the hidden realities of industrial meat production, the side that we rarely see on our plates. When we buy chicken or beef, we often don't think about the journey that it took to get there. But behind those neatly packaged cuts are powerful corporations, controversial practices, and a ripple effect that touches animals, farmers, our environment, and ultimately, all of us. So today, we're focusing on one of the biggest players in the industry, Tyson. From rapid growth chickens to the financial hold on farmers, we're breaking down what it means when big businesses become big food. And then we'll explore the question, is there a better way forward? So, let's get right into one of the biggest problematic companies, Tyson. And before we even dive deeper, let's take a moment to think about how and why the industrial meat production became so normalized. Industrial agriculture as we see it today wasn't always the standard. The drive for efficiency and mass production emerged post-World War II when the focus shifted to maximizing food output and minimizing costs. However, in chasing efficiency, we've strayed from the very essence of farming, a symbiotic relationship with nature and animals. Instead, we've transformed it into a mechanized, high-speed factory line where the goal isn't sustenance, but profit. This shift, while providing an affordable food supply, has led to countless hidden costs for the environment, farmers, and ultimately us as consumers. Tyson has spent decades genetically modifying their chickens to grow in half of the time that they naturally would, all in an effort to maximize profit. These chickens are bred to have larger breasts, the part of the chicken that most consumers want, but the cost of this bigger is better philosophy is devastating, both for the chickens and the farmers who raise them. In a documentary titled Food Inc., by the way, shout out to my environmental science teacher, John Bieber, for actually finding this documentary and showing it to us, because I would have not known if it wasn't for him, so thank you very much. In a documentary titled Food Inc., they take a peek into a farm that was being governed by Tyson. Within the overcrowded and disease-ridden chicken coop, the farmer notes that because these chickens are being fed genetically modified foods, their organs and bones can no longer keep up with the rapid growth, ultimately failing. This brings us then onto the topic of CAFOs, which, again, shout out to John Bieber, thank you, which they stand for Concentrated Animal Feeding Operations. And what these operations do are just, horrific. So they pack thousands of birds into small, overcrowded sheds where dust, feces, and ammonia fill the air, and it's no longer the same farming as years ago. Because nowadays, it's like a sweatshop for animals and a scheme for farmers to stay trapped in debt. And so farmers who work with companies like Tyson often find themselves in that cycle of debt. And so they're forced to constantly meet and invest in new equipment to meet Tyson's ever-growing demands. And if they can't keep up, Tyson threatens to drop them from the contract, essentially taking away their livelihood. To put this into perspective, the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition has documented how many of these farmers have taken on millions in debt to fulfill company requirements. Tyson keeps them on a financial leash, exploiting them. And so farming has lost this wholesome concept of peaceful, organic growth. Now, when it comes to Tyson, they're not the only players using these controversial methods. Corporations like JBS, Smithfield, and Cargill have similar practices and similarly high levels of control over the meat supply chain. And together, these companies dominate the market, creating a meat-packing monopoly, if that makes sense. When just a few companies control such a significant portion of our food, it creates this ripple effect across the market, limiting the choices and voices of both the farmers and the consumers. And it's almost impossible to go through the supermarket aisle without indirectly supporting one of these corporations, whether we realize it or not. And so for farmers, there's the continual challenge of meeting demanding corporate standards. And then for consumers, it's the hidden cost of cheap meat surfaces in forms that we might not always connect. There's things like rising healthcare costs, increased taxes for environmental cleanup, and the erosion of smaller family-owned farms that simply cannot compete. And then for communities, especially those near industrial farms, the pollution and health hazards are deadly realities. Industrial farms have been linked to respiratory issues, contaminated water sources, and other health risks for local populations. Industrialized farming, particularly in the meat sector, has led to the destruction of critical natural resources like rainforests. To clear land for cattle grazing or feed crop production, millions of acres of forest are destroyed, particularly in places like the Amazon, which in the past episode we realized is actually being restored as we know it. And so this not only devastates biodiversity, but also contributes massively to the global climate change. And let's be clear, this is not an issue limited to meat producers. The entire industrial food system, with its focus on monocropping, pesticide use, and excessive water consumption, strains ecosystems around the world. And these factory farms produce massive amounts of waste, and much of that waste, which is like manure, pesticides, and chemicals, end up in our water supply, And it's not just the land and the water that's polluted. The air is contaminated too. We've all heard of E. coli, and there was even a recent outbreak in McDonald's. And so what you might not know is that the conditions in these factories are breeding grounds for E. coli mutations, which is why outbreaks are so common. A hamburger today can contain meat from thousands of different cows, all mixed together in a processing plant. So if one cow is infected, that bacteria can spread throughout an entire batch of burgers, and this increases the risk of foodborne illnesses exponentially. Just think about the scale. One infected cow standing in its own feces can cause an entire company-wide crisis impacting the food that we eat. And I am so sorry if you're eating a burger right now. I want to make a quick note that before doing research, I had no idea that a lot of these things were going on. Before even my environmental science class, I had no idea these things were going on that badly. And so this next statistic that I have actually shocked me a little bit. And so it says, according to the Environmental Protection Agency, livestock farming contributes to a whopping 14.5% of all global greenhouse gas emissions, which is more than the entire transportation sector. And so what's interesting now is that there are new ways for transportation and there's new technology for transportation. So with all these new ways, we're assuming that the biggest issue is transportation, which don't get me wrong, it is a big issue. But I didn't realize that the farming was even worse. And so what's perhaps even more alarming is that when these practices are exposed, there's an attempt to suppress the truth. And so the meat industry has become so powerful that it's making it illegal for people to even talk about it. So in many states, there's these things called cheeseburger bills. And so it's making it harder to sue factory farms or expose their inhumane practices. And so these bills are a form of censorship designed to protect big corporations like Tyson and Purdue. The industry has grown so influential that it even lobbies against labeling laws, making it harder for consumers to know where their food is coming from. And so many farmers have faced legal battles when exposing what these meatpacking companies have done. Tyson, in particular, has repeatedly declined interviews with investigative filmmakers. Yet no matter how much they try to silence farmers, the continuous outbreaks of E. coli show their true colors because I don't think you can hide how many cases are coming out a day or a week or a month or a year. So 16 years after that documentary Food Inc. was aired, and we're still seeing the same results, and I feel like that's a little bit depressing. So we've lost the integrity of our food supply by focusing too much on growth and not enough on sustainability. And there's this thing called the triple bottom line, which balances people, planet, and profit, and it's used by organizations to measure their performance, and it's pretty much the only way to ensure success in the future. So imagine if more companies in this meat industry use this model. It would significantly reduce the impact on our planet while creating fairer treatment for farmers and better quality food. So what can we do? How can we address these systemic issues that affect not only the animals and farmers, but our entire food supply? As consumers, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of food system do we want to support? It's not about aiming for perfection, but rather about taking small, intentional steps towards change. And so the first step is awareness. The more that we know, the more that we can demand change. Make sure to read your food labels. Choose brands that are committed to ethical treatment of animals, fair wages for workers, and environmentally friendly practices. And I just want to make a side note. I understand how difficult it can be to find an actual sustainable company that's also affordable, because trust me, it's not easy. Just an important note. Just because an item says that their beef was grass-fed does not mean that the cows were sitting graciously in a lush field grazing. It's so easy to be misled by terms like natural or free range, which are often poorly regulated. Dig a little deeper. These terms don't always mean what we think they do. Local organic farms are the future if we want to support food integrity and protect the environment. Again, if you look at my link tree, there's a link to Loyola's sustainability options. Every fall there's a farmer's market. Chicago itself has so many farmer's markets. No matter where you are, there's going to be a farmer's market usually. And if you're able, shop at locally grown places. It's way more energy efficient and you can support locally. And if you're even up for it, this is like a bigger task. You can start your own little garden. And I want to make it clear, I'm not saying to stop eating burgers or meat altogether, because trust me, I love a good rack of ribs. I'm just saying that having chicken as your primary meat source is probably going to be much better for you and for the environment than having cows as your bigger meat source, or beef as your bigger meat source. Because not only there's a ton of health benefits, but it's sustainable, and not to mention for people who love lifting, it's got a great protein count compared to beef. And also, let's not overlook the power of advocacy either. The more that we speak out about these issues, the harder it becomes for corporations to ignore the demand for ethical and sustainable practices. Support policies that advocate for transparency in food labeling, and push for legislation that holds corporations accountable for their environmental footprint. The food system can't change overnight, but together we can push for incremental steps in the right direction. The meatpacking industry has been allowed to grow unchecked for far too long, putting profits over people, animals, and the planet. But we're not powerless, and we can demand more from the companies that feed us, and we can create a food system that benefits everybody. There are always so many options to evoke change, and don't let anyone tell you that it's hopeless. We have the ability to change, so let's just do that. Research the brands that you buy from, read all the labels of food that you eat, and just do the best that you can to make sure that you're making an impact. And trust me, a lot of other people are doing the same thing too. Thank you to everyone listening and to all the documentaries and articles that are being put forth to give truth to the people. Thank you again to my environmental science teacher for the documentary. And I'll put down all the names of the sources used in this podcast in the episode description. Please subscribe and continue to give me feedback on what you'd like to hear about next. If you want to be a guest on an episode, please feel free to DM me on Instagram. My name is Allison Tomas. This is Sustainably Speaking, and I'll see you next time.